Welcome everyone to our June Think and a Drink event. My name is Jetty Kawahatsu, and I am the Membership and Annual Fund Coordinator at the Honolulu Museum of Art. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Helona Norton Westbrook, HoMA's Director and CEO, to tell you a little bit more about our program today.
Thank you, Jetty. So aloha, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so thrilled to be sharing today's event with all of our HoMA members. So normally a Think and a Drink is an event that's only open to collectors level members, but we really wanted to open it up to the broader membership to have a chance to sample this sort of programming, which is so lively and dynamic. So this event takes place on the third Thursday of every month, and it gives members a behind the scenes access to local artists, to curators, art world insiders, all things that kind of give you the inside scoop on what's happening at HoMA and in the art world. So we're really delighted to have so many people joining us today. And we're going to go ahead and hear from Catherine Whitney, first of all, who's going to talk to us about the overarching themes of our exhibition that we have on at the moment, A Joyful Return, and specifically the Reflect exhibition, which is embedded within that larger project. So it's my pleasure to introduce Catherine Whitney, who is our Director of Curatorial Affairs.
Thank you, Helona. If I could have the first slide. Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending. I wanted to give you a little overview of our exhibition, Joyful Return, which is actually a project that's in 7 parts. It has 6 outdoor courtyard installations and 1 in-gallery experience. We started this idea, it just opened in April, and Helona sort of challenged Erin, our Director of Learning and Engagement, who will also be speaking tonight, and I to activate the courtyard spaces. We realized that the vaccines were coming, hope was on the horizon, and Helona really wanted us to activate the outdoor spaces, which people felt might be a little bit safer, spread across campus, work with local artists in the community, welcome our guests back. You know, we really missed everybody coming to the museum, the sense of sharing and socialization and engagement with our community. And we wanted to come up with a project that expressed our, you know, the fact that we miss you guys and that we wanted to welcome you back and work with local artists in our community. So Helona had this idea of joy. And so we wanted to welcome everybody back for this idea of the joyful return. And Erin and I were sort of brainstorming, and Erin had this concept of presence and absence. So we started brainstorming different courtyard interventions that might lead to presence and absence and reflect that literally. And we started with one that is an exhibition called Reveal that is just gonna have our first workshop this coming weekend. And it's a mural that will be covered in black vinyl to start with. It's by Maxine and Roxanne Ortiz, local artists of Wooden Wave here in town. And it was sort of based on children's scratchboard art. You know, it starts black and you scratch it off and it's rainbow images underneath. And so we thought that was really captured that concept of absence and presence and coming back and what was underneath. So that was sort of one of the 6 projects we started. We also centered one of our opening installations in the very front central courtyard and called it Return. And that was centered and is centered around Penelope, this large bronze sculpture that is a bronze image of Penelope, who in kind of classical Roman lore was the wife of Odysseus or Ulysses, who was waiting for her husband to return from the Trojan War after 20 years. So she is kind of portrayed as this classical motif of waiting and also of hopeful return. So around her, we have these bright bubbles, and in them, we've asked our community to populate these holes with images of themselves having wonderful experiences and memories at HoMA. So that's one of the installations that takes the audience's images, experiences, and makes it whole. So all of these require audience participation, community engagement, and artist activation. The image down on the bottom is another one. It's called Regrow. This is in our Kinau courtyard. And this was sort of driven by a local artist, Rebecca Marie Goldschmidt, and she is a recent MFA graduate from UH. And she has done this whole kind of hanging garden installation based on her Filipino heritage and her experiences growing up with a lot of these plants, and also her studies of plants that are endemic to Hawaii and many others that were brought into Hawaii as a larger reflection of our kind of multiculturalism here in our community, as well as the cross mingling of cultures represented in our gallery. So all of these are reflecting not only our environment, but HoMA specifically, our collections, and most importantly, our community that helps us activate this. Next slide, please. We might have a delay. There we go. Great. Thanks, Merrick. This is just another image of some of our activations within the courtyards. This is Rebecca, the artist I just mentioned on the far left in the dress. This was from last Friday night. We had 3 timed workshops with our community, and we had coconut frond weaving, and she led those. And you could actually make these kind of basketed rice cookers, as well as little fish that you could put on strings, and also mobiles. Another element is coming up in September. So all of these installations are going to be evolving over time. Sort of every month we'll have a new one opening throughout the whole year across the campus, and they're all very multisensory. So the Reliv is an experience that will be in our Asian courtyard in September, and that is basically a pop-up sound installation and sound experience that will incorporate our viewers' voices and memories of what the community means to them, what the museum means to them, their favorite places in the museum. So again, we need your voices, we need your images, we need your participation in all of these things. And it's really just a really fun, enlivened way to sort of reboot after the pandemic. And it was really sort of a chance to kind of offer almost an antidote, if you will, to the isolating pandemic, and to kind of celebrate our community and celebrate HoMA together. Okay, next slide. The one in-gallery element of this 7-part installation is Reflect. And you'll notice that all of the installations have this kind of RE at the beginning. So we have Regrow, Restore, Reflect, Recover, which will be a yarn installation. And our exhibition in the Gallery 27 and 28, it runs through the end of July. And this was something that our curator, Katherine Love, who's actually here with us tonight and will be available to answer questions, but we gave her the night off because she's technically on vacation and joining us from California. So we figured she didn't need to prepare tonight, but that she could participate. So I just want to give a shout out to her and her great work on this exhibition. This was an exhibition that we wanted to basically celebrate our top 20th century works in the collection. We have about 37 or 38 works spread between 2 galleries. And Helona also challenged us here to say, you know, I feel like there are some really wonderful pieces in the collection, and how can we get the community to know and celebrate and be really proud of the fact that we have these amazing, you know, international level artists, as well as really superstar local artists in our collection. How can we do that? How can we do a display that brings them to life, that people can connect with these works and be proud of what we have here in the city, and take advantage of this. So we put together this Reflect exhibition, Modern and Contemporary Highlights. And I wanted to point out that while in the 20th century, it was a period of great rapid change, mechanization, modernity, there was a lot of abstraction and kind of groundbreaking, you know, avant-garde explorations formally in a lot of works. There was also elements of realism. There's no one trajectory in the 20th century, and this exhibition really shows that. We have Realism by Dwayne Hanson's Secretary here, which is a favorite piece. I won't go into too much detail because another curator of ours, Tori, will be speaking on that next month. So if you have fun tonight and want to join us next month, please do. And Tori will tell you the Secretary's story, as well as who she may have been, where she's traveled, and also what her conservation and restoration, how that went. Again, these are works that are iconic in our collection. They're in all media, and we really tried to balance a combination of women as well as artists of color, which represent more than half of the objects on view here. Okay, next slide. Another huge element of Reflect was community engagement. We wanted our community to engage with these works. We didn't want just traditional curatorial labels on these pieces. We wanted people to come in and tell us what they thought. We wanted to listen, we wanted to invite, we wanted to participate. So together as a museum, we literally got organized core groups from across our entire museum and had core members from various departments in each core group that has run the different installations. We had a great team on Reflect, and we asked them to use their connections and make new connections and reach out to leaders or neighbors or spiritual leaders, artists, students, activists, entrepreneurs, and get a wide range of people and ask them to pick one piece and the Reflect exhibition to reflect upon from the perspective of their own daily pandemic affected life. So while these works are newly historic, they're from the last century, what do these works mean to you from the context of your life and what you've been through in the last 14 months here? We also wanted to emphasize that there's no one perfect interpretation for a work of art. Everybody's take is valid, and we wanted to see what everybody had to say. And sometimes works change from when they were created and the context in which they were created to a context 100 years later and how they're received at that time. And sometimes that's what great works of art can do. They can evolve and change and still be dynamic and relevant to audiences throughout time. So tonight, Erin, Halona, and I are going to share our favorite works from the exhibition, one each, and we're going to play the community responses. So there are 18 community responders who we recorded their voice, and then we condensed them on the labels, but we also have an option that you can do a QR code and listen to their audio tracks, both in the exhibition and online. So we're going to play their reflections for you first, and then we're going to give our own sort of take on what that work means to us or what the reflection meant to us, and work through that. And then at the very end, we'll have 3 works of art from the collection, and we'll ask you to type in some of your responses to those. So we'll do the 3 works, 10-minute reflection on these, and then if you could type in your questions, Jetty will then ask after each work of art that we go through. Okay, next slide, please. I just wanted to show a couple installation shots for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition, and really encourage you to please come if you haven't. It's really a very dense, energetic, fresh, vibrant display in both galleries, but there's also this wonderful sense of space. Every work really, I think, lives and glows on its own, but there's also this fascinating interaction between the works, whether it's textural textural conversations or color or metaphorical combinations or responses that happen. I think everybody will come to their own thing. This is a view of Gallery 28. And again, there's abstraction and realism, there's textures and expressions in all of these. And not to give it away, but this blue, green, and white abstraction that you see in both slides here is one of the works at the very end by Tadashi Sato that we'll ask you to potentially pick and reflect on. Next slide. Again, just another view we wanted to share. Artists of international stature that are in our collection, like Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, Roy Lichtenstein, but also artists like Satoru Abe, locally, Kapolani Landgraf, Marie McDonald, who Erin's going to speak about. So women, men, international. So anyways, there's a rich display of artwork here. Next slide, please. For some reason, the three works that we've chosen tonight to talk about are all in Gallery 27. And so I show you a view of Gallery 27 here. There are two other works at the end that we'll ask you to respond to. One is this work here by Philip Guston, looks like sort of a cherry on a horizon. And then the other work is this large figural ceramic piece by Viola Fry. Next slide, please. There was also one artist, one community member who responded to a work with an original musical composition. So we left it up to people how they wanted to respond. An unplanned, exciting interpretation that came to us kind of, as I said, unplanned. Next slide, please. Was a dancer from Honolulu who attends Smith College, and she's a senior, and she was basically asked by a museum studies major at Smith to dance in our space. And she had various friend dancers across the country in about 3 to 5 different museum spaces and asked them to do interpretive dances in a museum space. So Talia did that in ours. And I think one of the most amazing pieces that she did, from my mind, was one of the first ones. This is a painting, an abstraction by Robert Motherwell from 1963. And she dressed all in black with these heavy boots and just went for it kind of quietly. And this is an incredible kind of ink splatter expression with this gestural arc. And she was just transformed. It was incredible to watch her, but we actually have a video of that. But I just showed this piece that she just, spontaneously just kind of recreated these arcs and gestures that were so typical of the abstract expressionists, and who are often called action painters from the mid-century of the 20th century. Okay, next slide, please. So now to jump into the work that I wanted to address tonight. This is probably a favorite of all three of ours, but this is a piece by Alfonso Osorio, and it's called Linea Alba. It has been upstairs in our Philippine gallery for a long time. You all may have noticed it or not. It was against a kind of green wall in a slightly not hidden corner, but it just didn't jump and pop as it does here on this white wall. And I think Aaron mentioned at one time that he swears that this piece grew when we brought it down into the gallery. So it just has this incredible sense of fancy and menace and power in this space. And it works really nicely, I think, across from the Helen Frankenthaler that's very vertical and the paint seeps into the canvas, whereas his projects outward in kind of 3 dimensions, and it's very kind of quirky, squeaking, almost menacing, but somehow fun way. So this is an assemblage that he put together, and I went in the gallery today just to note all of the elements because you might not be able to see them all. But from what I could tell, there are buoys, there are abstract painting elements, there's doll's eyes, dowels, stained glass fragments, marbles, what looks like seaweed or dried grass, bones, shells, pearls, wooden phallic forms, what look like headlights with eyes staring out of them, upside down. There's an upside down deer head with actual antlers sticking out. There's a spear going right through the center. There are faces, and there's a little figurine at the top that's sort of a traditional wooden carved figure from the Philippines. The title of the work is called Linea Alba, which means it's Latin for white line. I looked it up, and Linea Alba is actually also a medical term or an anatomical term, which means it's a white fibrous structure made of connective tissue that's within your abdomen. So it basically runs the middle of your abdomen in humans and other vertebrates from your xiphoid processor, which is right about, by your ribs down into your pubic area. So that was pretty instructional. I think it will be fun to listen to the response here. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to ask Jetty and Merrick to play our community reflection, and then I'll get back to you a little bit more about the artist and some recurring motifs.
Welcome to Community Voices. Kira Swearingen is a second grade teacher at Wailea Elementary Public Charter School. Kira, along with several of her students, respond to Alfonso Osorio's Linea Alba.
As a teacher teaching through the COVID-19 pandemic, I feel this art structure accurately represents all the things on a teacher's plate. But this year especially, new things like masks, face shields, social distancing, smaller classroom sizes, no sharing, socialization looking different, virtual classrooms. It feels like organized chaos. Right when you feel like you've got the hang of something, a sharp arrow like the one you see in the structure puts you in an entire new direction with all the quick changes being made. However, I see resilience in this structure by the way the base is holding all the things piled up together. Our keiki have been so resilient through all the changes, and as a teacher of second grade students, I am so proud of their resilience and ability to also take on all of the new challenges we face together as a community.
What I think about this crazy art thing is it looks like social distancing because it's very long and it looks like 6 feet apart because it reminds me of it. And it also reminds me of like when the coronavirus goes near it, it kind of looks like some chemical that will kill the virus. And I think that would be good to have in our world. If it actually did, that would be very nice. And I also think that it looks like little germs to me, because like there's some little parts it looks like worms and all this bacteria or something, but it's actually not, but it reminds me of it. And yeah,
this look like someone's in the it looks like inside, but maybe someone got coronavirus in their body. That's what it looks like.
The square on this piece of artwork looks like the social distancing sign we have at school. This social distancing square means even though you want to sit next to your friends, you have to social distance. That's the only way we're going to get rid of this coronavirus. The square tubes look like germs that crawl around in your body when you get coronavirus. So make sure to wash your hands for 20 seconds or more. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it. I mean, how was that, huh? So let me tell you a little bit about the artist and his story, and then I think you'll see how right on these munchkins were. And again, anybody's interpretation is fair game here, but it's funny how much these are kind of right on. So Osorio was an artist of Hispanic, Philippine, and Chinese heritage. He was born in Manila in 1916, and he's best known for these very colorful, almost brutal abstract expressionist paintings and these extravagant, very layered, kind of menacing sculptures and assemblages. He has both organic and man-made objects that he assembles, as I said, sort of glass shells, plastic balls, beads, doll's eyes, arrows, and figurines. And rather than assemblages, which is something that the surrealists from the 1940s used to use when they put together found objects or strange objects in combination in their paintings, surrealism referring to kind of dreams of the unconscious, he called his assemblages congregations. And I think the congregations not only implied to congregate gather, to pull together, but also referred to his Catholic upbringing. He was schooled in a Benedictine high school. It has this great sense of verticality and color, almost referencing stained glass windows with actual elements of like plastic and glass in there. And originally stained glass windows were to tell stories to people who were not necessarily literate at the time, way back in the ancient times or Renaissance, to sort of tell these stories through pictures of tell stories of the Bible. Also, the fact that he gathers these objects together and has this kind of dreamlike, haunting, but sort of playful, odd, illogical combinations also is a little bit of his nod to surrealism, which was very prevalent at the time when he worked, which was sort of the 1950s and 60s in particular, although he lived quite a long life. Osorio, while known for these very dramatic and kind of brutal paintings and sculptures, some know him as a social member of the abstract expressionist school. He was actually a friend, a fellow artist, and a patron of Jackson Pollock, who's probably best known for his action paintings and drip paintings from around 1950, and the abstract expressionist school that following the war really kind of just drew from the inside to express their angst and anger about everything that had happened during the war, and decided to create a new reality because the war had made everything kind of almost ugly or invalid. And so they needed to kind of create a new reality out of painting. He was also very friendly with Pollock's wife, Lee Krasner. And in fact, Lee Krasner put together these tables that she assembled that she called mosaic tables, largely out of glass. And so she had some pieces from 1947 that really influenced this phase of his career very much. As I said, he attended a Benedictine high school. He also attended prep school in England. He immigrated to the US in the 30s, became a naturalized citizen, and graduated from Harvard in 1938. He was a heir to a sugar fortune in the Philippines, so he was never lacking for money. He ended up purchasing a 70-acre ranch and home and studio in the East Hamptons in New York, where a lot of the abstract expressionists from New York City went to kind of get out of the city in the summer on the weekends. And he really sort of developed this whole kind of hub of abstract and avant-garde thought and socialization there. And he found material for his sculptures there. There's a lot of, I think these are buoys, these kind of rounded things that look almost like headlights that come out, and shells or something that come out of his works, as well as these antlers. But really, despite his connections to Pollock, who was, Time magazine asked if he was the most important American artist in 1949, Life magazine, excuse me, despite his connections to this important American painting group, he really kind of remains on the margins. And it might have been that he was a queer artist of color and just really never had his due at that time. But, in this era now, when we're seeing all these people and artists who we've overlooked in the traditional art historical canon, it's really exciting to find an artist like this who's still so involved socially and had his own exciting production. Another interesting part of his life was that he served in the U.S. Army Medical Corps as a medical illustrator. And this is where I think the kids really nailed this. He would actually stand on a ladder and look down at surgical procedures and record them. And he said these kind of gruesome, a lot of them were soldiers coming back from the war or having, surgeries to recover or whatnot. And he said it really affected him the rest of his life. And so this kind of fear of, these inside anatomical germs, as the kids were saying, is totally right on. And if you look at the title of you know, of this kind of connective tissue and this structure that's within your abdomen. I'm sure that's exactly what it was, these germs and this bacteria that he was painting, you know, not only in his non-traditional use of materials, but in his, with the abstract expressionists in their non-traditional way. I think it also exposes him in a very vulnerable way. There is a brand new master's student named Matthew Miranda who just finished his master's thesis on Osorio. He just got his degree in the spring of 2021 from ASU, and he has quoted a diary of Osorio's. And I just want to read, it's like about 5 lines of a little poem he wrote. It's kind of interesting. Osorio wrote, "The necessity of being a Eurasian, deracinated, which basically means uprooted from one's national, geographic, or social environment, never at home in any conventional category. The necessity of being among the insulted and the injured. The necessity of being HS or BS." Those initials probably being homosexual or bisexual. So this accumulation of these odd juxtapositions and arrangements really refer to many parts of his life: his Catholicism, his sexuality, his medical procedures, his demons, his fears, his, you know, wanting to burst forth, and his spirituality. It's really a fascinating melange of hope and spirituality, as well as morbidity and vulnerability, I think. So this idea of the connective tissue is really beautiful, I think, in his title, as well as in the kids' recordings and interpretations. And I think Helona and Erin would agree that this was a piece we rediscovered. And so we actually did not only connect the community to our collection, but we connected to this piece that we were kind of overlooking. So that's what I have to say for that one. And I'd love to hear some of your comments and questions.
I just want to share in the chat, Robert Graham did ask, how did the museum come to have this piece? And Katherine Love, if you could just go ahead and answer that for the group, that would be great.
Yes, so it was a gift of the Honorable Claire Booth Luce to the museum in 1975.
And folks, feel free to write your questions or comments either in the chat or the Q&A. We have access to both, and we'd love to share your thoughts and opinions or clarify any curiosity that you have about this piece as well. There's no further questions. Any of the other panelists, if you have any comments you'd like to make, otherwise we can move on to the next mini presentation, the next piece.
Yeah, I think it's going to be nice to, when we get to the end of all the presentations, kind of think about them in relation to each other too, and maybe have some further comment and reflection there.
Absolutely. Oh, Fred Shang asked a question. Where will it go after this?
Good question, Fred. Oh, does somebody else want to answer that, or should I jump in? I'd like to keep it out pretty prominently. I loved having it in the Philippine Gallery, but we also loved the effect of having it in a situation with his contemporaries from around the country, around the world. And I think we want to keep it on a white wall with a lot of space around it and bring a lot of attention. So we'll probably, after the close of the exhibition, it might go into storage for just a little bit, but we're going to bring out some highlights from this and have a more kind of a smaller contemporary space. So I'd love to keep that up more prominently, but to be determined, but you'll be prominently displayed in some context.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. If we could go to the next slide, and we will present on the next piece.
I think that's my cue to go. So we don't have a direct shot of the image here, but what you see is the Louise Nevelson, which is what I wanted to talk to you about tonight. We'll show a fuller shot of it in just a moment. But if you see it kind of over here off to the side, across from the Robert Motherwell that Catherine talked about earlier, it's tucked away there. Let's go to the next image so you can see it a little bit more clearly. So this work by Louise Nevelson, Black Zag X from 1969, is a wonderful work in HoMA's permanent collection. It is also from the estate of Claire Booth Luce, which is a really nice connection there to the previous work. So Louise Nevelson, I mean, was just this incredible pioneer in the 20th century in the art world. She was born in 1899 and lived until 1988. And if you think about the world events that transpired from 1899 to 1988, I think that you can have a real appreciation for just all of the things that that she saw in her lifetime. So she was originally from what is now the present day Ukraine. That's where she was born. And then she immigrated to the US with her family as a child. Initially, they were in Maine, which is where Catherine Whitney is from, and then moved on to New York State. So she had, and spent her adult life, especially early in her life, in New York City. So she had this real kind of melding of worlds and of kind of, you know, environments, right? Both natural, physical, and also cultural, that really informed her work for the entirety of her life. She was a real character. She was known as having this kind of larger than life artist presence that she cultivated. She wore, you know, really sort of wonderfully flamboyant fake eyelashes and had headscarves and was always just sort of, you know, very visibly this sort of dramatic artist in the midst of any gathering. But she worked diligently as an artist throughout her life in an extremely sexist environment, and really didn't have her due until the very, very final decades of her life, even though she worked and identified herself as an artist that entire time. Some interesting things about her were that in the 1920s, late 1920s, she started to attend the Art Students League in New York. She studied with Hans Hofmann. Shortly after that, she was an assistant for a while to Diego Rivera, who was married to Frida Kahlo. And it was working with Diego Rivera where she was introduced to pre-Columbian art. So pottery and artifacts from that era. And she really started, although it took her quite some time, she really started to identify this visual language of hers, which was really interesting in terms of, you know, bringing together all those elements of her life, right? Like that I was mentioning a moment ago, those different clashes of cultures, of place, of the city, of nature, and blending those together. The work here that we have, Black Zag X, is really indicative of Louise Nevelson. It's really sort of a signature piece. You know, she, as I said, she didn't have great success in her life early on. She was a struggling artist for a long time. She had a marriage that fell apart during the Great Depression, and she had a young son. So she was constantly sort of scrounging for materials, and one of the legends around her is that, you know, that's where she really got interested in her use of wood as the predominant material that she used with her work. You know, there's sort of a legend about her going out and gathering wood pieces to burn for scrap to keep herself and her son warm, and that it was that black and charred wood that really was incredibly influential in her work. So this work, the Black Zag X, as I was saying, is really sort of a signature piece of a certain kind of the work she did. And what I mean by that is that it's very, very intimate in scale, you know, just about 3 feet by 3 feet, and, you know, really contains these different layered upon shapes that cast these shadows. When you look at a Louise Nevelson, you're kind of constantly looking with your mind to create the system. What system is she trying to explain or show us? You sort of try and make logic and order out of it. And it really was, as I said, her own visual language. As her career progressed, and she actually did become more and more successful and recognized, as she should have been all along, the work started to get larger and more complex, partly because she had more funding to do what she wanted to do. And so that eventually she went from creating more of these intimately scaled pieces to really monumental sculptures that she created in the final couple of decades of her life. This piece is actually, I went down to the gallery yesterday and I was looking at this very closely. It uses Formica, which, so this is from 1969. You think about kind of Formica countertops and tabletops during that time. This was like an element that she started to incorporate into her works around this time. So really embracing that idea of everyday materials. If you think about like the burnt wood and you think about Formica, and you just think about these things that are sort of elements of domestic space, but then reassembled into this like wholly new, amazing assemblage. That was really what she was all about in her work. I also chose this work to share with you because Amanda Schwartzwalder, who is my amazing assistant at the museum, provided the commentary for it. So maybe let's go ahead and listen to that now.
Welcome to Community Voices. Amanda Schwartzwalder is the executive assistant to the director at the Honolulu Museum of Art. Amanda reflects on art's power to imitate and embody real life while looking at the sculpture Black Zag X by Louise Nevelson.
My name is Amanda Schwartzwalder. I am the executive assistant to the director at the Honolulu Museum of Art. And I have been working here now for just over a year. And prior to that, I was living in New York, where I was born and raised. I think what first drew me when it was the color. It's completely black. It stands out from everything else. But then when I looked at it closer, it made me think a lot about COVID and how it has impacted our lives. Because I feel like we all have these different pieces that make up our lives. Things like, family, friends, work, relationships, things we like to do. And as we grow up and become adults, we take all those pieces, which are all kind of shaped differently, and we kind of jigsaw them together to make a single shape. And that shape is like a version of our life, like just one shape. And I feel like when COVID came, it took all of our lives, all of those shapes, and kind of blew it up. And by the time the pieces had hit the ground and we were looking at them again, they had all morphed and transformed into something completely different. And I feel like for me personally, I was looking at those pieces and thinking, okay, how can I take these and put them back together in a shape that I had? Like, because that's what's familiar, that's what I know, that's what's comfortable. But that just wasn't possible. Everything was different. Your job was no longer the same. Your schooling for your child was no longer the same. Even things like going to a grocery store, a great big adventure where you had to like plan, go to battle for toilet paper. And so we had to take all these pieces, put them back together, and it soon became apparent you couldn't do it in the same way. And instead, we all had to figure out a way to put them together into something new that maybe wasn't as symmetrical or seamless or unified as what it had been before. And when you look at the work, you see, these different kinds of quadrants of shapes, and some of them, they all have different orientation and they're made up of different shapes, just like our lives are made up of different shapes. And they're all put together in a different way. And that's what I feel like we've all had to do during COVID, is pick up these new pieces of our lives and figure out a new way to put them together. And some are, more squished or more crammed than others, and some are more layered, and some have bigger pieces or smaller pieces, but we've all figured out a way to make them fit. It's just in a different way than we thought they could fit before. And that's what really struck me looking at it.
So I just really enjoy that, and Amanda's commentary I think is so spot on, and interestingly, like really actually does, even without knowing that much about the artist and her background, really does kind of speak to a recurring theme within Nevelson's work, right? Which is just this sort of absorbing of information about all different facets of life, visually, culturally, personally, and then trying to put that together into her own personal language. And so I think Amanda's remarks there are just really, really spot on. I'll wait till we get back to the image. We'll get there. Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, there you go, got it. So yeah, I am so appreciative of the work that's gone into this project with the community voices, and the incredible work that both Katherine Love and Catherine Whitney have done along with Aaron and his team. And yeah, excited to hear the next presentation.
I think we have a quick question/comment from Fred Shang in our Q&A. So he comments zag as in zigzag, and he says the system, a Rube Goldberg contraption, perhaps?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that my sense with the Nevelsons that I've seen has always been that they were deeply meaningful to her and understood by her to mean something particular, but she wasn't bound with people seeing exactly what she saw as she made them. And if you get the chance, in your travels to see some of the larger Nevelsons, it's sort of like this same mood and feeling, but writ large, and really quite intense and spectacular. She had, in my previous museum where I worked, we had a really large scale Nevelson from later in her life that was bathed in this blue light. And she had specified that it always had to be shown in a blue light. And so she was all about the kind of mood and sensibility of the work, but without being prescriptive about exactly as you say, Fred, like what was the system particular or the idea or concept that she was referring to.
Robert Graham has another comment. He said, I respectively say that I find Nevelson's work so similar from one piece to another, all objects confined in a place and all black.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing, because there's definitely like a repetition, almost like an obsessiveness to the work. She was compelled to create these types of images, these types of structures. And, I mentioned it kind of earlier, but she was just working in this incredibly sexist environment. And I think actually on the label for this work in the gallery, we mentioned that, a New York Times critic or some major newspaper critic in New York saw her work and early on said, oh, we were so excited about this work until we found out that it was by a woman. And then we got less excited. And we thought at first we had discovered somebody great, but then we found out she was a woman. So I think that to me, that sort of sense of sameness that comes through in the work is partly about asserting this is who she is. This is who she is. And you see it again and again. And as she goes on in her career, it gets bigger and bigger and louder. And she was trying to take up space, right? Both conceptually and physically in the work she created. So I think there's, just speculating, but I think there might be an intentionality to that repetition.
Great. I think you answered this question, but Arlinda did ask, for an artist being known to have such a colorful presence, why do you think her signature pieces were all Black? So
yeah, I would say the same thing about, so she was really quite serious that she be taken, or I should say she was quite adamant that she be taken seriously as an artist. She didn't want to be known as a female artist, you know, especially in that kind of moment in the 20th century. That was a big sort of argument and distinction. And so she really, really desired to be known as an artist in her own right. And so I think in a way, you know, there's nothing particularly feminine in the color palette of these. And I think that might also be intentional.
That's great. Robert Oakes has a question. He asks, was Claire Booth Luce a major collector of her work, or was this just a one-off purchase for her?
I don't know. I was actually wondering that same thing. I think we need to do a little bit of research into that. We you know, we definitely had this strong historic connection at HoMA with Claire Booth Luce, and she gave a number of works. So that would be a really interesting thing for Catherine and her team to delve into.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think, oh, we have one more question. Or a comment from Melina Donio, and they say, I did seem to think that this piece of work was done by a man. So that's interesting. The critics also thought the same. All right, I think we can go to the next slide and start on the third and final mini presentation. And then folks, feel free to, of course, you know, write questions that you have for this piece, but also in general, and then we will compare and contrast at the end.
Hi everyone. I'm gonna have to confess here. This is a little bit weird because we're talking to a screen, and I know there's a whole bunch of people like listening in and watching this. So if you guys can just say like hi in the chat, that would make me feel a whole lot better in giving this presentation. So please do that, just so you know, I'm talking to people out there. And before we go on, I wanted to make some comments about the exhibition, and this slide here represents something really important to me. Early on in the process, when we're putting together this exhibition, we had a meeting. It was myself, Catherine Whitney, Katherine Love, Helona, and Anjali Lee, who's our senior designer, or our director of design and creative services or something. And we're like, okay, this exhibition needs to be our signature works in our modern and contemporary collections, and we're gonna put them all in the galleries, and it's gonna be this like new way of seeing these works. That's what Helena was saying. This is what we're gonna do, and she, you know, she asked me a question, and I said, you know, Helena, I've been here for a while, and I've seen all of these pieces on view in different iterations and exhibitions, and man, you know, they're not new to me. You know, I was like, maybe that's just me being jaded. And so I'm like, I can't believe I just told my director that. But, you know, we had further discussions, and the show went through many different iterations. And then I was focusing on other parts of Joyful Return. So I wasn't in those meetings. And later on, Halona's like, hey, you know, this exhibition is turning out really great. And they're beginning to install it. And she said, did you see it yet? And I'm like, oh, no, not yet. She's like, don't go in the gallery. Wait till it's open, right? So I waited. You listen to your boss. And so I walked in the first day, and I opened the door, and I saw the Osorio that we took a look at. And I totally had chicken skin. I'm like, that's not the Afonso Osorio. That can't be. The Afonso Osorio that I know was in the Philippines gallery, and it was 3 feet tall, and it does not look like that. It grew on the wall. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. This is fantastic. I take 3 steps forward, I turn left, and I see what we see here in front of us. I see the Viola Fry, this red-suited gigantic man pondering Jerry Okimoto's wooden vase Behind it is our fantastic Deben corn. And to the left is Marie McDonald's Kappa. And I was like, speechless. Okay, so I've seen these works a number of times, never like this. And I was like, Halona was right. This is different. So kudos to Halona, Catherine, and Catherine for putting together an exhibition that changed my shade of jade, excuse me, to a really light, beautiful green. So I wanted to thank you guys for that in this forum. So having said that, I really, really like this image because it talks about relationships and conversations that works of art have with each other, right? So the Viola Fry, the large red suited man is intentionally looking at this Jerry Okimoto sculpture, which is made of pieces of wood, laminated together and carved into this monumentalized vase. I just made up a word. Those lines, as you look and your eyes change distance and height, you see those lines turn from straight to curved. That echoes Marie McDonald's Kappa piece on the wall. And then you have these cadence of lines and shapes that are formed as they intersect in her work that is reflected into the Deben corn. So these disparate works, sculpture, ceramics, wood, painting, textiles from disparate parts of the world and times suddenly have this synergy. And that's what great curating is. So that's what we're taking a look at here. Next slide, please. Again, so here's a better shot of Jerry Okimoto. For those of you who aren't familiar with his work, he's part of the lauded Metcalfe Chateau, a number of local artists that moved to New York in the mid-century. Notable ones like Tadashi Sato and Satoru Abe rubbed elbows with the big names and then came back here to finish their careers. And then we have, a really, really important Deben corn that's been hiding in our basement for many, many years and is finally making its debut again. And most notably next to two works of art that have roots here, right? With Jerry Okimoto and Marie McDonald. Next slide, please. So Marie McDonald, she's actually more or better known as a laymaker. That's where she's written a number of books on laymaking. One of them in 1985 called Kale, and that's like if you want to learn about laymaking here in Hawaii, that's the book that you go to. In 2003, she co-authored a book with the director of Honolulu Botanical Gardens, Paul Weissich, on another book on lays. In 1990, she was awarded, an NEA National Heritage Fellowship as a laymaker. So she's from Molokai. She has roots that go back to the Mahoe chiefs here in Hawaii, and she studied in Texas, Texas Women's University in Denton, and got her art degree there. She returned to Hawaii and resided on the Big Island and was working for the city and county there, and also was an art teacher. At some point, she started working along other craftspeople and artisans to develop new ways to bring back the art of kapa making. So she was a part of this group called Hoala Kapa, which means Kapa Revival. Kapa is actually, so right here we have like this beautifully painted and designed sheet of paper essentially. But kapa begins as a shrub, a little tree, paper mulberry or valke in Hawaiian. And imagine like a stalk that's about 9 feet tall, a little bit narrower than a baseball bat. And Marie would take that stalk and cut it and then peel off the bark, soak it in water, scrape off the outer edge, lay it flat, and then take another piece of wood or a beater, place that bark on a rock anvil and start hitting it over and over and over again as it got flatter and wider and thinner to create this textile. When I think about kapa, if you've ever had the experience to watch a copper maker create kapa, the one thing that you notice right away is that it's noisy, it's rhythmic, it's lyrical. So whenever I see kapa, I think about music. I think about beats. I think about cadence. I think about hula. I don't know if there's a connection there between, kahiko and kapa making, but it's that. I'm gonna play around. So I have this piece of wood here. It's like, that's just one kapa maker. And usually they do this in groups. So you have this beautiful sound of rhythm and beating over and over and over again. Each strike has a different tone and note. And it's one of the most beautiful sounds that I can think of here in Hawaii, and revolves around art making. The other thing that you see here is the pattern and the design. The valke paper, when it's completely transformed into a sheet, is an off-white color. And what you see here with the yellows and the reds, the browns and purples are actually colors and dyes derived from plant material grown here in Hawaii. Some of them are endemic. Some of them were brought here by the Polynesians when they came to the islands. All types of plants, things that might be a little bit recognizable to you would be turmeric will yield like this yellowy orange. The reddish color there is actually, it's just red dirt, right? So if you've been to Mililani and you collect some of that and you mixed it up with some water and you applied it onto a piece of kapa, you would get something like this. The repetitive shapes and designs that you see come from carving a piece of bamboo and dipped into the dye and then placed over and over and over again and compressed onto this sheet of kapa. So same thing like that rhythm of beating the fibers, you have this like rhythm of applying shapes to create design over and over and over again. Another thing that you don't see here is that in the beating process of kapa, the beater, which is actually a piece of wood that's rectangular, what they do is they carve, the kapa makers will carve different shapes in there, and that helps spread the fibers out more evenly. And Marie had this signature shape that she would carve into her beater, and it was called, Maka upena, which means maka is eye, and upena is net. So it's the eye of the net, and it's shaped like a diamond. So if we put this up and we had backlit it, you would see these diamond shapes over and over and over and over again, creating this kind of diaphanous light shining through this fabric. In 2009, we actually had an exhibition here of Marie's work in our textile gallery, where a number of the works were backlit, and it just added to, the luxuriousness of these pieces, right? What else do I say about Marie? I'll tell you guys a story. So in 2009, when she came over from the Big Island, she had all these works. And like I said, she's a part of this collective. I was in my office here, and Sarah Oka at the time, our curator of textiles, who just retired not too long ago, she calls me on the phone. She said, "Aaron, you need to come to my office right now." I'm like, "Uh-oh, what did I do?" So I quickly run to her office, and I look through the window and the door, and there's Marie, and I think like 8 or 9 other women that I didn't know. Come to find out, they're all kappa makers. And I quietly walk in, and they are talking about kappa. On the table are pieces like this that Marie created. There are pieces from other parts of Polynesia, Tahitian pieces, Tongan pieces, all over. And they are looking at it closely in silence, asking each other questions, comparing and contrasting the materials, the watermark, the stamps, the imagery, the dyes. They wouldn't even finish each other's they would finish each other's sentences. They would speak in a way where information wasn't being transferred. They would just like, "Hey, yeah." And it was like one of the most important and meaningful experiences that I've had working here, because I was sitting in a room with the brain trust of this media, this technique, and would never, ever be recreated ever again, right? Just imagine being in a room with a bunch of geniuses that know everything about a specific subject, having a conversation. That's what I witnessed that day. And I'll never forget it. The other thing that I will say about this work is that the importance of it being in this gallery, in this exhibition, reflect alongside major works from our collection from around the world. All right, so Marie McDonald, Kapulani Landgraf, 2 Native Hawaiians, 2 outstanding artists, 2 women, alongside people like Motherwell, Warhol, who else is in the show? Arneson, all these big names, and here we are putting them on the same level. That's where they belong, and that means a lot to me here in Hawaii, because the artwork that we have, the artists that are working here, are just as important, and that's what we're trying to do here going forward with HoMA. So I just wanted to say that. Last thing that I wanted to say, and I can't remember. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. So thanks, and any questions about Marie's work?
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. Just have a few comments. Robert Graham says, on the first slide, the Dwayne Hansen secretary looks like it's in conversation with the Okimoto. And also he makes the comment that both of the forms are of women. So I thought that was an interesting observation. And in our chat, Giatura Cordera says, in today's parlance, Claire B. Luce would be considered a feminist, a label she would probably dislike. She was a woman of many accomplishments, promoted other women of intellect and talent, but found female achievements natural and didn't need any extra recognition. It should have just been equal recognition. So I love that. Definitely well put.
You know, going back to the Nevelson, as an art educator, I will say this: Louise Nevelson's work is there's curriculum and art projects that are based on her work and her artwork in every single art school that I've ever seen anywhere. Everybody does the Louise Nevelson activity and project. It's pretty interesting.
It's funny you said that, Aaron, because in my previous office, I had a work that the students, the kids at the art school, had created their version of Louise Nevelson, and it was awesome. It was so good, and I think it's because You know, I mean, it's interesting because it's like it has this really strong visual language that was particular to her. And it's interesting that kids especially can easily pick up that language and speak to it. I would have been interested if we'd had the second graders comment on this work.
Yeah, it probably made them, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's when our art school is running, and you know, at the end of the session, there was always a Louise Nevelson on the wall. Whenever I go and visit schools, I was like, where's the Louise Nevelson inspired piece? And like, there it is. You know, I don't leave until I see it, but they're always there. Yeah.
Erin, I think before we get to the general questions, is it okay if we play the audio for the—
Oh, yes, sure.
And then I will open it up to all the general question Q&A.
Welcome to Community Voices. Michael Pilipang is a kumuhula, or halau hula ka no ao, and a printmaker. Kumu Michael reflects on the prolific artist Marie McDonald and her production of kapa.
During the Merrimack Festival in Hilo, she did an exhibit of woodcuts, you know, of all the flowers in her yard, you know, lays, people making lays, legends behind it, and these beautiful woodcuts. And I was always amazed. I did not know at that time she studied art. You know, I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, this famous lay maker, you know. And so when I saw all of this work, I was just floored by it. But I studied as a printmaker. Wow, you know, I was just taken by it. And then later on to find out she was making kapa. She goes back to make kapa, which is just fabulous because she had Honolulu, her farm, her 10-acre Hawaiian Homes farm up in Wainea. And she was able to grow her own wall case. She was able to grow her own dyes and things like that, which I find so fascinating. It's just, you know, it's the same thing with her philosophy of her lay making. If you're going to be a lay maker, plant your own plants. So if she's going to be her kapa maker, she would plant her own plants for dye. And which I think is quite a real wonderful way of explaining it, that she's her own resource, you know. And I think that's what was really interesting about her, having to be determined to preserve the artwork, but also understanding that you can't preserve the artwork unless you have the supplies, you know. And so she was creating her own supplies. She was creating her own methods of doing things. She was also a contemporary artist, you know, 1 foot in the door in the past, but understanding that in today's society, you know, it's different. And I remember her first couple works with walke, which is the mulberry bark that they used to make kapa. When she started out, she didn't have enough walke to make kapa. So she would take all the fibers and throw it in a blender and make paper. You know, and again, as an artist, as an art maker, printmaker, I was always fascinated with making paper too, you know. So I was like, just found this really interesting woman, who many people know her as the premier, the kupuna, the elder of blay making. But she was, you know, very diverse in many things that she did. What's interesting is we have her kapa work and we have her lei work. Yeah, her leis have not survived because that's what a lei is. It's not supposed to survive. It's supposed to be for an occasion. But her kapa work is something that has survived because that's the purpose of it. You know, either clothing, a decorative piece for bedding or a bow skirt or something. And during her time when this art form of kapa making was being lost or was lost, you know, she and a group of artists, Hanano'e'au artists,
I think the audio is a little bit quiet for some folks to hear. So I think we will just stop it here, and I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat so you folks can go ahead and access that in your own leisure at a more suitable volume. So I think
Jenny, can I say one last thing? It slipped my mind. I was just getting a little bit emotional talking, and it came back to me when I was listening to Michael. One last thing about that work of Marie's was that at that time, she and her collective was working on creating costumes and wardrobes for a halal to participate in Merry Monarch. And that was going to be the very first time that a halal performed in Kappa.
Wow.
So what you saw there was one of the studies that she was doing. So, if you go back, there are images online and videos of the halal performing in these Kappa pieces that she and her collective had done. And I think that's that makes it even a little bit more special there, where it's not just, a sheet of Kappa that's hanging on the wall. This is actually, there's a function and utility for it, from, what it was really meant to be when Polynesians created this material. So I just wanted to share that.
You know how many years ago that was for Merry Monarch?
This was around this, it was they showed the exhibition was in 2009. I think it was the year after that.
Wow.
Yeah. So only recently. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Kathy Kaufman asks, does the kappa have any hand sewing or stitching?
No, this is actually one piece of fabric. So what they'll do is the bark is only so wide, and you can beat it until it stretches out to, a single stalk will produce a piece of kappa that is about 10 to 12 inches. And then what you do is you take those two sheets and you overlap them, and then you beat them together and essentially weld the fibers together, very similar to felting. So it's the attachments, the fibers just kind of become one with the striking of the beater.
Amazing. A few comments. Melina Dano says, this is a beautiful piece of art, and the left side reminds her of zippers just waiting to be sealed together.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Deirdre Cordera asks, Erin, did she use natural dyes as well on this kappa?
Yes, they're all natural. They're all plant-based material, except for the red dirt.
I don't have any more questions or comments here that I see. So if anybody has any more, please go ahead and put those in the chat now. Or if any of the panelists have any comments on sort of the overall presentation, or compare and contrast between the pieces, connections that you folks see.
I just wanted to say we really, really appreciate everybody joining this evening, and especially, on Zoom. We would rather be in person, and we hope that we soon will be in person, and we'll be able to share all of it with you in the galleries, which is really the ideal place where we want to be with you, talking about the works of art right in front of them. So also just want to thank everybody for attending, and also thank you just for bearing with us with this format, which I know we are all really tired of, but thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Helena. I think we are just coming to the end. Patricia Johnson has one more comment. She says, I appreciate having time for each piece. So interesting, and produces intimacy with pieces seen through the years, and having new experiences with those pieces. So that's really great. Thank you so much. And I think we are coming to the end of the presentation. So thank you again so much to Catherine, Erin, and Helona. And yes, if you enjoyed this, I went ahead and put more information in the chat on the collectors and fellows level. So please check that out. Feel free to give me a call and I can chat with you and let you know more about those levels of membership. And like Catherine mentioned as well, just upcoming next month, we are doing a Think and a Drink on the Secretary, on Dwayne Hanson, and Tori will be presenting that. So that's going to be very exciting. And we look forward to seeing all you folks then. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your evening.